Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. This story will touch your heart and remind you of the power of compassion in our everyday lives. It was a calm Sunday morning in a small town in the Philippines. The church was filled with familiar faces, parents holding young children, elderly couples who had attended the same pews for decades, and teenagers quietly scrolling on their phones, pretending to pay attention. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful reflections across the polished wooden floor. The smell of incense hung lightly in the air, mixing with the faint scent of old hymn books and polished pews. Choir members practiced softly in the background, their voices blending with the gentle murmur of congregants greeting one another. On the altar, the priest arranged the chalice and bread for the Eucharist, completely unaware that this ordinary morning would soon turn into an unforgettable moment that would ripple through the entire community. Among the congregation sat a young boy, no more than 10 years old, with eyes that darted nervously between the altar and the door. His hands clutched a worn notebook, its edges frayed, the pages full of scribbled drawings and thoughts he seemed shy or scared to share. The priest noticed him. Something in the boy's posture, a slight tremble of his hand. The tension in his shoulders caught his attention immediately. There was an unusual weight in the air, a sense that beneath the calm Sunday morning, something extraordinary was about to unfold. The priest continued with the opening prayers, but his gaze kept returning to the boy. Each time he did, he felt a tug, an instinct telling him that this child needed more than just the routine words of Mass. This was not just about the ritual. This was about humanity, about noticing someone in need, about pausing the ordinary to address the extraordinary. The boy shifted nervously in his seat, glancing at the priest, then down at his hands. He was holding back tears, yet he was determined to attend, to be part of the community, to do what he thought was expected of him. But there was a secret he carried, one that weighed heavily on his small shoulders, and the priest sensed it immediately. And then it happened. Midway through the opening hymn, the priest did something that stunned everyone. He raised his hand, signaling for the choir to stop, for the music to cease, for the service to pause entirely. Gasps rippled through the pews. The congregants looked around in confusion, unsure of what was happening. Whispers spread like wildfire. The priest calmly descended from the altar, walking slowly down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the young boy in the back pew. Every head turned to watch this unusual moment. Children whispered to each other, elders frowned in curiosity, and teenagers set down their phones, sensing the gravity of the situation. The priest reached the boy, kneeling gently beside him, lowering his voice so that only the child could hear. The boy whispered something the priest could barely catch, something personal, painful, and deeply human. The priest listened intently, nodding, reassuring, and then, raising his voice just enough for the congregation to hear. He shared the boy's concern with everyone present, not to embarrass him, but to transform the Mass into a moment of collective compassion. The congregation froze, shocked, moved, unsure how to react. Some gasped audibly, others covered their mouths, and a few wiped tears from their eyes. What had been a normal Sunday Mass had transformed into a living lesson about empathy, about noticing the silent struggles in the people around us. The boy had revealed that he was struggling with a personal loss, a fear that had kept him awake at night, a worry that he felt no one would understand. The priest, with gentle authority, guided him through prayer, reassurance, and reflection, showing the boy and everyone present that the church was a place not only for ritual, but for humanity, for understanding, and for care. The congregation witnessed a transformation, seeing faith not just as tradition, but as compassion in action. Every adult present felt a shift in their hearts, remembering times when they, too, had needed attention, understanding, or care. The children in the pews observed in awe, understanding in small yet profound ways the power of kindness and empathy. The boy's words resonated through the church, filling the room with a silence that was heavy yet tender, a silence that made everyone lean in closer, listen harder, and reflect more deeply than they ever had during a Sunday Mass. The priest, standing beside him, spoke with a calm authority that carried more weight than any sermon could, emphasizing that sometimes the most important moments in life are not the grand gestures, but the quiet acts of attention, of care, of recognition for someone who feels invisible. The congregation began to understand that faith was not measured solely by ritual, by kneeling and standing by the repetition of prayers and hymns, but by the way they could recognize, honor, and support the human spirit, especially when it was fragile. The boy, sensing the full attention of everyone around him, started to open up more, revealing the depth of his fear and his longing for understanding. His voice trembled, yet there was courage in it, a courage that only comes from trusting another human being fully, knowing that judgment would not follow, that support would not fail, that compassion would be offered freely. The priest guided him, speaking words of comfort, of encouragement, reminding the boy that he was never alone, that even in moments of personal despair, there was a community willing to bear witness to his struggle and share in the burden. The other congregants, deeply moved, felt their own hearts expand as empathy spread from one person to another. They realized that by witnessing and participating in this interaction, they were becoming part of something larger than themselves, part of a living example of love in action. Parents silently held their children closer, whispering reassurances, while elders reflected on the wisdom of the moment. Recognizing that the simplicity of human connection often surpasses even the most structured religious teachings. Teenagers, who had initially been distracted by their phones or idle chatter, now stared in rapt attention, understanding that this was more than a ritual, it was life itself, unfolding in a sacred space, showing that vulnerability and courage could coexist, that faith could be active, and that love could be demonstrated not only in grand acts, but in the deliberate attention to a single soul in need. The priest continued to speak, his voice steady, emphasizing the responsibility each person had to notice the quiet struggles around them, to step outside their own concerns, to recognize that sometimes the greatest sermons are not delivered from the altar but lived through actions of care and compassion. Slowly, the boy's posture changed. The tension in his shoulders eased, his hands unclenched, and a small, tentative smile appeared on his face. The church, once filled with uncertainty and shock, began to hum with a gentle warmth, a collective sigh of relief and hope. The act of pausing the Mass for one child had created a profound ripple effect. The entire congregation, witnesses to a moment of raw honesty and shared humanity, experienced a shift in perspective. They were reminded that community is not measured by numbers, by how many attend services, or by how often rituals are performed, but by how individuals lift each other in times of need, by how they extend empathy beyond words, and by how they honor the courage of one when it matters most. By the conclusion of the Mass, the priest invited everyone to stand, not merely to resume the service, but to participate in a symbolic gesture of collective acknowledgement and support. The boy, now visibly lighter and calmer, received the quiet but profound recognition of the community. People offered nods, smiles, and silent words of encouragement. What began as a typical Sunday morning transformed into a historic example of human compassion, a story that would be retold for generations. A demonstration of how pausing for one person could create an impact that resonated far beyond the walls of the church. Word spread through the town over the following days, touching families, schools, and local businesses, inspiring acts of kindness, conversations about empathy, and renewed attention to the quiet struggles often overlooked in daily life. The boy's courage and the priest's wisdom became a beacon of hope, showing that even small, singular moments could ignite profound change, that love and attention can break barriers, and that faith at its heart is always a living, breathing act of care. And so, the story reminds us all that every individual matters, that the courage of one can inspire many, and that sometimes, stopping everything for a single child can move an entire community. If this story moved you, share it today. Let it remind you to pause, notice, and care for those around you. Small acts of compassion can change lives, and one person's courage can inspire a whole community. Thanks for watching.